I recently did an interview that didn't actually go well. It started out, but within 10 minutes, we both kind of agreed that, hey, let's just call it a day. Let's not do the interview. It was clear that, the guy I was interviewing was coming looking for a fight, and which is a shame because I really wanted to get his perspective. He's been a writer for a lot of comics, and I think he was useful. And I also like the idea that I get some people on here who have different opinions. But the conversation derailed rather quickly, and it derailed over this one, what I see as a common argument, and that is the comic industry doing better or worse? Why is that such a flashpoint for people, and why can't we come together around data? Because there is actual data that gives us that answer. It's just, it's a very polarized question. So let's talk about that. Hey everybody, this is Perch. It's hard to get me pissed off. I would say when I say that, I mean, I've got different stages. I actually get pissed off internally pretty easily. I would almost guess faster than most. My wife knows this. I can get irritated very, very quickly. But externally, I've got a really good filter. And I think part of it's working with customers. Part of it's, it's just, if you want to keep making money, if you want to keep your job, if you want to have a good customer base, you have to learn how to hide that anger and that frustration. Sometimes that frustration is legitimate, like somebody's coming in and being a dick, and you're dealing with that. Sometimes it's illegitimate, meaning you just didn't get enough sleep, and so you're cranky. In any event, you have to learn how to master these things and work with people. If you can't learn how to work with people, you're not going to be working for long. It's kind of the general statement. So I go do this interview, and I was concerned because this person struggled to do the interview with me, and then there was a lot of the, well, are you Comicsgate or are you not Comicsgate? A lot of these entry questions that whenever these questions are being asked, I'm like, we're off on the wrong. Look, dude, I just want to know about your experience as a writer. That's it. I want to know your take on it. You can say whatever you want. I'm going to be gracious to you. If you say things I don't agree with, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to be very gracious to you because you're my guest and I'm going to treat you that way. So at any rate, right off the bat, as we're kind of, typically when I do an interview, I have a few, talk a little bit up front with the person about, hey, what do you want to talk about? Is there anything you don't want to talk about? Do you want to steer away from certain discussions? I always say, hey, are you involved in any projects right now? So I want to make sure I don't ask you something that's going to hose a project you might have. I don't want to get you into trouble. And I asked, is there anything you want to talk about? And the guy's like, well, I want to talk about if you think the comic industry is dying. And I go, well, I don't think anybody cares what I think about that. I think it's you. You're the star here, not me. So my opinion of whether it's dying is somewhat irrelevant. I think the interesting question is, what do you think? And he's like, well, I think it's doing great. The numbers show it's doing great. I think only an idiot would see otherwise. And this is probably where I made a mistake. I'm like, well, it's more nuanced than that. I think that there are signs of definite positivity where you can say things are going well, and I think there's signs of definite negativity where you can say there's improvement to be made. And he's like, oh, just name one thing that's wrong with it. Name one thing that's factual. It's wrong with it. And I go into some details, but and very quickly it got to the so you don't think they should make comics for women and other things. It just nonsense. But which, for the record, as I said to this guy, and I'll say now, no, absolutely they should make comics for women and all these groups. You're going to make a person of color comic. You're going to make something that appeals to the LGBT community. Awesome. You can do all those things. Get comics out to as big an audience as you can. But make sure you connect with that audience. Don't make a comic for a community and then not market it there and get talent that's not going to sell it, and then you've done nothing. You've spent some money going after a market that you're not going to get. You have to, if you're going to start the job, you have to finish the job. Is my statement, and that doesn't mean don't start the job at all. But I mean, I would argue that if you are not confident, you can actually finish your job, that you can't actually complete the goal that you're trying to go for. Maybe you, certainly at the big publisher level, maybe you shouldn't try. You shouldn't be making comics for anybody. If you don't think you can actually connect your product to an audience, then you're on the wrong track. Just full stop with whatever you're producing. But anyway, be that as it may. there's these graphs that come up that show that the comic industry is growing right now, that this last year, 2019, was the biggest year that it's been. Now, 2020 is going to be an absolute horror show, and I would hope that most people who are reasonable would look at that and not go, aha, see, it is dying, because everything is going to look crap in 2020. But in 2019, it shows the numbers are up. And so that's good news. It's flat out good news. A lot of people do these hot take videos where like, it seems like good news, but it's not actually good news. No, that's jumping too quick to the details. The truth is that that's good news. For the comic book industry, just in general, as a giant blanket statement, that number indicates that there is financial interest in that market overall. Now, how do you get to that money? How do you actually succeed in that is a much more complicated question, and that's where it starts to break down. If you look at the numbers, graphic novel sales are up, but even there, graphic novel is a term that's used for a lot of different books, and so it's not really a fair term either. There's graphic novels, and then there's kind of what Raina Telgemeier does and Dogman, and that is considered a graphic novel, but that's very different from saying, hey, here is, a 6-issue trade paperback for Spider-Man Hunted. Those are both listed at times as graphic novels, but those are not the same thing. They're not marketed in the same place. They're not sold through the same channels. So it's inaccurate to say, hey, I'm going to include all of Raina Telgemeier's success as a reason why we should continue forward in making, trade paperbacks with kind of every character we have, because they're not the same thing. You see a lot of growth in channels outside of the direct market. So that's positive. That's even if you work in the direct market and are a retailer there, that should be considered a positive. More comics in more places equals good. But in terms of kind of the danger signs are you're not seeing floppies grow consistently. And some people will say, well, that's okay, because the market is changing, and they're absolutely right. The market is changing. And I think whether or not you're feeling good about that is really based on how prepared you are. If you're prepared for the market to change and you've got viable product and you're putting things out and you're ready to deal with this change, then that market changing is cool. No problems. There's no problems at all with that. However, if the soul of your business is dependent on floppies and kind of that part of the business, then you should be alarmed. That's bad news for you. So if you're Marvel or DC right now, you should be looking at these numbers in the current state of the world, not with a, haha, I told you guys the comic industry is doing great. You should be looking at it with a bit of alarm, because the growth sectors are happening outside of your core business. Now, that doesn't mean you can't pivot your core business. And frankly, you should. You need to be pivoting right now. However, you also have to, this is called relational market. So your relational market at Marvel and DC is to sell to a certain segment of the audience. Now, you may believe that audience is going away, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if your entire comic industry is growing, and you're seeing a lot of the growth is happening in young adult graphic novels, which is a ton of the increase is happening from there, that does not mean that you can go grab that market. That market exists, that market is growing, but that market may not be for you. You have a relational market to your business. Your business, like it or hate it, has been superhero comics if you're Marvel and DC. Monthly superhero comics has been the crux of your business. You've also got some money coming out of graphic novels, but the majority of that money is coming from collected floppies. That's your market. So if you're going to change that market, if you're going to go grab these extra dollars and, own the trolls or whatever you're going to have to do, you have two problems. Number one, your company is looked at for this legacy business, for this floppy superhero business. The growth is not there. So you have to convince the market that you're versatile enough to actually change and play in that world. That is way easier said than done. Most companies, and I would say here 90% of companies, fail at this. It's like McDonald's saying, we're going to leverage our name and our brand and our power in the industry to convince everybody that we're also a yoga supplemental drink company. it's probably not going to work. You face an uphill battle to convince people that you, the maker of the Big Mac, can come up with healthy soy-based vegan drinks for yoga people. That's going to be a hard sell. Doesn't mean it's impossible. It means it's very, very difficult. So if you're so again, this is to say, when people look at this chart that shows growth, there's a counter argument. A lot of people are looking at it going, see, you don't deserve any of this. Actually, the business is collapsing. That's not your money. I've seen that said on a lot of live streams. And there's an element of truth to that, just like there's an element of truth the other direction. But there's clear evidence that the comic market is quite healthy, quite large, and has a lot of room for growth. The unhealthy, risky part is the current dominant players are being disrupted by new business. And those current dominant players have no clear strategy that any of us can see to basically, take part in this growth market. If there is one, we haven't seen it yet. Now, I'm sure, or I hope, that over at Marvel and DC, they're having either one of two conversations. Conversation A would be, hey, how do we take advantage of this new market? What do we need to do? What kind of people do we need to bring in? What kind of product do we need to sell? How do we get some of that pie? Or conversation B is, hey, we have an established market. Let's make sure that we're continuing to grow our part of the share. Let's leverage kind of this growth in this other area to make sure that our classic superhero monthly business is stable, capable, maybe catching this YA audience as they age, so that we're using that business as a springboard for our own. Or the super smart company is doing both simultaneously. I have a little bit of worry because when I see the leadership of these companies talking either in interviews or in social media, they want to really grab onto this idea of the comic industry is healthier than ever. And you're right, it is, but not the you part of it. And by the way, I guess it goes without saying, this is always where it gets more downvotes, but yes, crowdfunding does play into this market, but really at such a nascent value that it's not worth going too heavily into. Is it there? Yes. Is there some money there? Yes. It's great. It's not moving the needle from a bigger business perspective, like some of these other things. And I'll explain why. If Scholastic were able to pivot, or not pivot, but just grow, find 3 more people that did even a quarter of what Raina Telgemeier did, this business would expand and grow dramatically by billions with a B. Alternatively, if Marvel or DC or one of these companies could figure out a good way, either through partnership or just clever planning, that all of those Dogman and Telgemeier and YA book audience would basically recognize that Marvel and DC were publishing books that related to that audience, just maybe a little older, a nice entry into their books, they probably too would expand their business significantly by billions. The crowdfunding stuff is good. I'm not hand-waving it away. I'm not saying it's irrelevant. I'm not saying any of that. But in the grand scheme of things, it's an island compared to where the massive business is going. Now, the one aspect I will say in its defense and where it's going is that it seems to, by and large, have a better connection to its audience. What I mean by that is whether you're, and when I say crowdfunding, people often in their head think one thing in particular. I'm talking about all crowdfunding, big umbrella. The creators who are putting out their books generally have a better sense of their market, from my observation, than the big companies. They are putting out books that they know, at least on some level, their market will consume, that their market will accept. They're putting out books that they know there's an audience for. At the big two, it's not always as clear if there's that same level of understanding about their market. Anyway, it was an interesting back and forth. Like I said, this interview, I would have loved to have had it. Offer is still out. Buddy, if you're listening to this, you said you listened to all the videos. If you're listening to this, come on back. Let's do this interview. I want to hear what you have to say. But more importantly, I think it benefits nobody to have these very shrill conversations around, is the business wildly successful or failing? It doesn't help anything. it is a detailed conversation, is a nuanced conversation. The answer can truthfully be said yes to both sides. But that doesn't really get us anywhere. You got to get to that next step, which is, how is it succeeding, or how is it failing, and what needs to be done? That's the interesting conversation. That's the one we need to get to. Anyway, let me know your comments below, what your thoughts are, what you think. Throw it in there. Let me have it. By all means, let me have it. Like, subscribe. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do. More importantly, thanks for listening.